University student, I didn't get his name.
Mr. Armstrong.
Mr. Armstrong,
Mr.
head of the
Armstrong.
Head of the Department of Economics.
Head of the Department of Economics. Sir, you mentioned a lot of analysis, data, and all of that stuff, but you didn't tell us, would you be kind enough to tell us where or how you arrive at the, or what formula you use to bring your data from different years into one base year. Secondly, I would like you to think about how you can help us and help the members of the audience to understand the scientific definition, if you can do that now, it's okay, of economic development. We use all these terminologies, and they have specific definitions from a scientific point of view: economic development, economic growth, and economic progress. Now, Dr. Bradley Waldron, I want to thank you very much. You did a very great job, and I think you did half of my job. And so I want to let you know that I'm now the National Coordinator for the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And I identified almost with everything that you said. They are facts. And I would be very grateful if you can help me by providing some of that information. I would like to see those slides. Indeed, there are a lot of discrepancies where the distribution of the concessions are concerned. There's a lack of data, and a lot of this, things that we ought not to have. And we have to indeed streamline the collection of data regarding the mining industry, in the extractive industries, and where energy is concerned. So the question is, I'm sorry that the minister's gone, about the Bureau of Statistics. I had some interaction with the Bureau of Statistics, and I found out that we do not do statistical analysis as is required by the Statistics Act of Guyana. So I would ask members of the panel here, our distinguished panelists, to probably advise us and tell the audience why this is not happening and when it's going to happen, because as Dr. Bradley Waldron said, we indeed have to collect data on the basis of which we can be doing analysis, and on the basis of the results of those analyses, we'll be able to make more informed decisions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Rudy. Brian, pass the mic to Brian.
Good evening, panel. I think you all did a wonderful job. Each person defended very well their position. The private sector rep gave his point, which I support. Dr. Thomas, as he knows, I've always been a supporter. And he clearly laid out a problem that we have. But what by the way, before I go on to Grantley, what I really want to talk about, I thought that the Minister of Finance did a great job of selling himself. I think he needs a PR officer. I'm serious. As the best I've ever heard his side of the argument. But let me just say something. I've been in the manufacturing sector when it was really growing as the president. I am now in the timber sector, and I also serve with the extractive industries recently. What Dr. Waldron said applies also to forestry. And it's a serious problem. Secondly, he made the most important point, and I'm sure it missed everybody, but you might not understand how important it is. We cannot move unless we deal first with energy. Let me explain. We have timber. We cannot produce timber more competitively than Trinidad if we sell the raw log to Trinidad and they process it, even though the labor is higher, and they've done all the transmitting costs, because their energy costs in drying the timber which is basic, is a very minuscule charge. And so that our cheap labor can compete with the price that we are paying for energy. Our energy is unreliable and very high cost, and hence we can never be competitive on the export market. I am speaking with 40 years of experience in manufacturing. I am saying energy helped to kill us. Other things killed us, like skills migrating, lack of foreign exchange, but the basic thing is energy. Let us assume we want to get industry going again, and the government sets up clusters. You got to do that and decide what industries they're going to focus on. Not lose us in the wild and tell us, my auto manufacturer, I want to do something. Work with us, work with the university, work particularly with the technical schools to build skills. You come back to energy. Why should I go and set up a manufacturing process to make flooring or anything that I can sell nowhere? We're really not in the game. The second problem is shipping. But shipping has a lot to do with how much you can put on the boat. But outside of that, since we stop transporting bauxite, we don't dredge the rivers. So we really can't carry large cargo. Hence, our exporting capacity is almost zero. I'm saying that having all these fancy retail things aren't going to do very much for us. It's like people living on dough. Living on dough, you know what's dough? Handouts. What you have to do, a country has to earn money if it's going to spend it. And if you don't have clear plans of how you're going to make your industries competitive, you're wasting time. Thank you, Grant.
Great, great. Let's pass the microphone to Dave Martins, and then...
Oh, Dave.
I didn't have my hand up, but I think I've said it all in the song. I would just add one comment generally to, it's in keeping with what Dr. Walton was saying. The thing I notice in Guyana that we're lacking energy, of course, is in all of these presentations, everyone that I've identified our lack of systems. Every area that we have in this country, we are crippled by the lack of systems. It might be the whole, that's my comment.
Good night, everyone. I'm going to be very, very brief because I'm cognizant of the time constraints at the base. First of all, Richard Rambaran. I'm an economist, and I'm going to speak in my private capacity as opposed to any official capacity. First of all, the very first comment I want to make is the comment on energy. The point was raised, and that's a very good point with reference to it. But one of the things which we really have to look at in terms of pushing production and making our products competitive on the international market is looking at our technology transfer. We are hardly looking at any indigenous types of production systems or anything with regards to that. And our indigenous communities, as we know, they have their own production systems, etc. We have not been investigating this. So technology transfer is a great problem with regards to our country. We're depending a lot on foreign transfer of technology, and this is something which we must investigate. But that's a discussion moving away. I'd like to ask two very quick things. One is for Professor Thomas, and this goes towards Praxis. I know, Professor Thomas, when you were much younger than you are now, you have a good understanding of what is meant, of what it means when we say Praxis. Yourself, Dr. Rodney, Dr. Rupert Narayan, you guys did good, demonstrated good praxis with regards to WPA. In contemporary times, we see that there is a lack of praxis with regards to the youth. All right, they're hardly involved in the application of political economy knowledge, for example. I was a UGS's president, and it was very difficult. You had to get into the students' classrooms and almost sit with them and beg them. What do you think is the cause for this lack of praxis in contemporary times? That's one. And two, on a more technical basis, I know you did your doctoral dissertation on finance in Guyana, and especially the colonial financial system at that point in time. I'd like to ask, what do you see with Guyana graduating to an upper middle income status country in July 2016, which that is another point for debate, but what do you see this having, how do you see this having an effect on our concessional borrowing and how our country will develop, and this entire phenomenon of financial deepening, especially with regards to developing our domestic securities market? So I'd like to just ask Professor Thomas to respond to these two questions. Thank you.
Let's take the microphone to the back, and then we will take a round of commentary, and then we'll have a second round of questions or comments from the audience.
Good evening, I want to pick Edwards, University of Guyana. I think one of the panelists, Captain Cavallo, made a proposition that if taxes were lowered, you will have a higher amount of returns in relation to tax revenue. Is that your proposition, Captain Cavallo? I think it was short term, but I would want to look at three hypotheses in support of what you're saying. The first is that humans are good. Secondly, humans like choice. And third, human beings are creative. And if we were to accept that those hypotheses are true, what we want to conclude that an oppressive tax system will lead good people to either avoid or evade tax. Secondly, if you want to go a bit further to understand how human beings behave in some situations, you may say you might need to have a very punitive approach. Masculinity theory will tell us somewhat different. Because based on masculinity theory, we're told that a more punitive system will lead to hyper-masculine people being motivated to do what the punitive system was set out to deter. And so, while you might say that you need to have certain figures, I think studies might have actually shown where persons, once they have a very oppressive tax system, will try their best to either evade or to avoid paying taxes. That's all I want to say. My name, thank you.
Okay. So we'll take a round of comments, responses. We'll just go in the order starting from Mr. Armstrong. And then we'll start the second round with Eric Phillips.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Is it okay if I stand or sit? Should I stand?
Choice is yours.
I'll stand. So the two questions, one deals with the distinction between economic growth, economic progress, and economic development. I'll start there. Economics is considered to be a social science as it relates to how society uses scarce productive resources. In terms of economic growth can be, how about now? Can you hear me? Good. So in terms of economic growth,
You have a better microphone.
how about now? Better. Good. In terms of economic growth can be defined in two ways. Either increases in our real GDP or increases in our real GDP per capita. In the past, this is in the 50s, we generally we used growth as a means of development. So the argument was, once we're growing faster than our population we were developing. This is because they used the trickle-down effect. If we grow fast, that can trickle down into jobs, it can reduce unemployment, and therefore it can create economic development. But we find that in the 60s and the 70s, countries were achieving their growth targets, but yet a large portion of the population remained unemployed and in poverty. So economists gravitate to a more meaningful definition towards development, which is not only focusing on growth. Growth is a component of economic development. But in terms of economic development, it speaks to the mechanisms, whether it be political, economical, and institutional mechanisms that helps to bring about rapid transformation into the most vulnerable people. So the poor, how the political system, how the economic system, how the social system can transform the economic well-being of individuals. That's a measure of development. Now, development includes growth. It's a component of growth. Growth is a component of development. But development goes beyond just growth. In terms of economic performance and development, you find in the literature that there is generally an interchange between measuring economic performance and development. So people tend to use performance as development. But you'll find in a more precise argument that when we talk about performance, we use the concept industrialization. So we move from your agriculture to your manufacturing and then to service. You're progressing along that line. But still in that definition, you still cannot be achieving economic development because it deals with the social aspect. So you can be building up your industries, your manufacturing industries, and then getting into service. But yet still a large portion of your population can remain unemployed. So there's a definition there's a slight distinction between performance and development. And there's a big definition between growth, performance, and development. In terms of the second question, in terms of getting the data, like I've mentioned to you, getting data is one of the most challenging things that you can encounter as it relates to doing an empirical study in Guyana. In terms of my spending, I peruse the budget speeches as well as the budget estimates taken out from the Ministry of Finance website. In terms of getting my human development values, I got that from the UNDP reports. I think I would have mentioned this to you. In the years in which I didn't receive a value for example, 1991 to about 2000 to 1985, those values were estimates. What I did was I take the closest 5 years contribution towards GDP for those indicators, and then average those contributions, and then estimate it using my GDP as the values for those earlier part of the year. You can get those information on the Ministry of Finance website. So those are estimates. I hope that sort of answers your questions.
Good. Thank you, Bradley. Let's go to Bradley.
Mr. Chairman, just one very quick comment. The energy story, I'm not going to flag that anymore. I think I made my point where that is concerned. And then the options that are available to us, there's a full range. And the state need not, as part of its policy, be spending a lot of money doing all sorts of foolishness, but causing people to engage in specific activities. I mean, like I mentioned biomass. I am so attracted to the idea of biomass myself that I'm investing in it right now myself, because I think that in a short term, rather in a localized way, there is an opportunity, and I think there is something to be said for rural stabilization, used considering bioenergy, and it's something that I think I'm going to write formally about at one stage, but it's something that needs to be looked at because it makes sense given the economic distribution and then the way we have settled across this country. I'm a country boy myself, and so that is something that is close to my heart right now. But I just let that pass. The other one, just one other comment. Brian, look, as I ranked for myself the things that I would like to see the annual budgets treat with, one of them, the first one, is the state of our human condition, as reflected through the education, purposeful education. The second one is, of course, the energy. The third one is our waterways. 183,000 square miles means nothing if you can't, in fact, move the products out and move inputs in. And there is no opportunity for transformation in this country, piddling with a couple square miles of coastal swamp. If you do not create an opportunity to move products. I'll stop at that because there is some hard numbers. I'm an exporter and I know what that means, the difference between a 5,000 ton vessel and a 35,000 ton vessel. It would make most of these operations that are now uneconomic, very economic. I just pass on to Rob.
Were you expecting me to make a comment?
If you want to make a comment, go right ahead.
I certainly would refer to a question which the young economist asked about Guyana graduating to a middle-income country. I knew you directed the question to Professor Thomas, but and then asking what implications that had for the development of the domestic securities market. Do I understand the question correctly? The issue of the graduation of Guyana from a country that would enjoy concessional financing has to do with the way in which the international community measures economic progress. And while we all might disagree with the methodology that is being used at the moment, the mere fact that Guyana has satisfied the conditions which those countries who influence both the way in which bilateral aid is given as well as multilateral aid is given. Until we change the principal criteria, there's very little that we can do about that. Now, with respect to the other part of your question, there is no direct link between aid and the development of our securities market. Our securities market is influenced largely by the investment opportunities that exist within the country. And to the extent that the private sector doesn't feel as if there are investment opportunities, it probably will be difficult. And here's why. The capital market refers primarily to the sale and purchase of shares. And if there's going to be a new investment, that investor might be looking for additional funds off of the capital market, or even if it's an existing company, that company might also be looking for shares off of the existing market, or investors off of the existing market. But if you look at all those companies that at the moment have their stocks publicly traded on the stock exchange in Guyana, what you will see is that their external financing structure has not changed in years. In other words, they are not seeking to grow their companies through the use of external equity financing. What instead they're doing is using the internal equity that they have to grow the companies. That's what's happening for all these years. And therefore, in my view, until, and I can say this, even though the tax laws allow for no dividends, no taxes on dividends, you still do not have companies going to our private stock market in order to increase their investments within their companies and so forth. So to a large extent, what is happening is the stock market is actually being used as another form of savings and nothing more. Until the number of outstanding shares, number of authorized shares begin to increase, nothing else will happen. And I can't, maybe Jerry right now, why companies are willing to do some things, but I do agree with some of the constraints that have been identified. We know that shipping is a major problem, and I had cause to remind someone the other day that over 60, 70 years ago, the chief executive of one of the major companies in this country had observed that the draft of that Demerara River was about 20 meters. Yes, and today it is still about that. So we have not done anything to improve the infrastructure that would help our businesses to feel that they have a chance of being very competitive in this country. As a consequence, I think a lot of them probably feel they have reached the point of the level of satisfaction and are not necessarily interested or are not required, I would say, to really exercise their minds to grow their companies at a rate faster than which they are growing at. That's what I would say.
Great, thank you, Jerry.
I just quickly want to say that I'm sitting at a table with a lot of academics, a lot of people who intellectualize, very intelligent way musicians. I'm a mere jungle pilot. And so, I'm a mere jungle pilot. And but in doing what I do, I will live through this country in the 70s and the 80s, and I will live through a transformation. And sometimes it's we have very short memories. I've lived through a time when if I had $1 US in my pocket, I could go to jail. If I had a pound of flour in my car, the car could be seized and I could go to jail. Toilet paper and sweet soaps. I mean, and these are real issues. I lived here, I was a member of the Guyana Defense Force, I was the head of the Army Air Corps, and this thing went on. And I have seen, I think the gentleman in the back talked about good people getting very creative and innovative. You know, they say the wiser the government, the smarter the population. And I have seen the entire population criminalize itself. All of us were smuggling flour, sweet soap. I used to fly to Barbados and then put the Pampers below the seat. But my wife insists that my children have to get Pampers. So I became a smuggler of Pampers from Barbados.
Jerry Goodbye, the Pampers smuggler.
No, we could laugh. You know, back then it's funny. But the point is, we don't want a Walmart that is not hospitable to its customers. We want to be able to get our taxes, we want our country to develop, but we want to be able to do that in a partnership. And I want to re-emphasize that I believe this private sector commission is committed to public-private sector partnership. And the IEB in 2006 actually established a strategy in Guyana that is the most innovative and revolutionary strategy to foster and enhance public-private sector partnership, which is called the competitiveness strategy. And it surprised me how many people don't know that strategy exists, and that there were PPDs, public-private dialogue groups, between all of the sectors going on, between private, labor, and government. The issue with the harbor, the issue with power, the issue with customs. We identified 142 items in this country that we said affected our competitiveness. And then we start taking 10
and we would meet at a council that was chaired at the level of most senior part of this government, of the government of the day. And it was working, and we were talking, and so a lot of private sector people then became embedded on different boards, and so it wasn't them and us anymore, we were working together. And I will have one criticism of this new government, is that the minute they came into power, they scrapped the competitive strategy, because, and it wasn't the PPP, this was the IDB, the competitive strategy was the IDB strategy paid for by the IDB, that was taking Guyana to another level of private-public dialogue and cooperation. And those are things I believe that are making a tremendous difference. And so today, when the private sector and the government seems to be not talking, it is not because it's not a will. The Minister of Finance, like you said, we are very, very close. We talk all the time, but every time we plan a meeting to happen, for some reason he's out of the country, the private sector can't get a team, and the determination to work together, there's a lot of will, but they're not finding the way. And I could say this, I believe there's no other road of development of Guyana unless it's a public-private sector cooperation and strategy. Thank you very much.
Great. See you later.
Thank you. I happen to be an academic in government before I retire. I want to make 4 small comments. All of them derive from my observation as an academic in a governmental circumstance. First of all, the issue of the definition of growth, development, and all that. Everywhere and everybody that I know pay homage to the concept that we no longer speak of growth and development, but of sustainable development. So we embrace the notion of environmental factors in the development of them. And that goes as a priority commitment of everybody that is spoken to. The second point I want to make is that everybody that I've met, also in the public service, and in fact in government, has a strong commitment to recognizing the importance of power to the future of development. And I would tell you, as a member of a committee who are supervising the work of some consultants that are preparing an energy plan for Guyana, this is the part of the most intensive area of work that is being done right now in Guyana, the development of an energy plan. It started from the previous government through the efforts of the IDB that was completed in the middle of 2016, and consequently that the government took a decision to develop a national energy plan and to prepare a scenario for going forward involving all the national consultations that should take place in 2017 to bring this plan to fruition. So from my perspective, therefore, I accept the views that others hold within the sectors that I come in contact with, that power is central to the future development of Guyana. The third point I want to make is that in relation to the specific question asked of me about the graduation to the building of status, if you ever read the actual statement of the World Bank, you see the hinge a lot of that around the fact that we're approaching the coming time for oil and gas development and extraction and exporting that. And that is where I ended my presentation, to say that the future of Ghana cannot be determined simply by looking and trying to extend what has existed in the past, because we're going to go through a qualitative transformative set of circumstances in the coming time forward. The most important thing I think task we face is how we try to prepare ourselves for dealing with that, so we learn the lessons from the past, so we don't repeat all the errors that we felt so many other countries in our circumstances. And I think that means that we still have problems to contend with for maybe the next 4 or 5 years that are severe and immense. But I think those problems pale in comparison to the problems that we have to cater for following subsequently that year after 2020. And that is what the lesson I'd like to leave people here with. That's the main challenge for public finance in this country. The last issue which I'd like to touch on is the one that Mr. Brammer raised about the importance of praxis. I mean, that would take me all night. And I really don't want to get engaged in that because it's such a deep, complex, and theoretical and abstract issue in an environment where to be an academic is not comfortable. I mean, it's not a waste of time. So I let them veil for that. And so I offer discuss with you at some convenient time if we give me a call.
That's a very practical response. Thank you. Let's go to the second round, and we'll start with Eric, and then we'll come to the gentleman in the front.
Thank you, BC. To Dr. Waldron, I agree with all of your points. The first, with the mining, of course, we have a cartel there, and essentially it's preventing growth because it's not inclusive growth. And if you were to look at the richest companies in Guyana, they've done that off of our national patrimony, which has been not exclusive. Secondly, in terms of energy, you're absolutely right. Professor Thomas referenced it. There was a comprehensive study that looked at several hydro sites, 5 in particular. The government also looked at 7 different energy types, wind, biomass. As a matter of fact, biomass is the cheapest. Gaisuka is producing energy at 2 cents per kilowatt hour. But fundamentally, Amalia Falls is perhaps our best strategic option for hydro. The dilemma we have is that there were technical flaws which would have resulted in us having to keep the old plant 2 months without water. But more fundamentally, it was the financial structure, because GPL would have had to pay $130 million a year for 20 years, which is $2.6 billion. There would have been about a $40 or $50 million annual gap that the government would have had to pay. So the capital structure was too overloaded, and our rates would not have gone down. But fundamentally, you're right in terms of energy, hydro being the cheapest option. The third point you made about the road to Brazil, that's been common sense since 1996. It was presented in this room. It's critical for growth, but it hasn't happened yet, so hopefully it will. And in terms of Jerry, the competitive strategy made a lot of sense. The dilemma again is that the private sector is not inclusive, and for us to move forward as a nation, the private sector has to be broadened and widened and be more inclusive, and that's how we'll grow.
Good, let's pass the microphone to the gentleman in front.
Good evening. My name is Alfonso. So we heard a lot today about the role of the public sector in stimulating the economy, but I didn't hear a lot about what's on? Can you hear me? Yeah. About a problem with public intervention is there is concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. So I haven't heard a lot about ways to address that problem in terms of public accountability. What are some things that you guys suggest we could start doing to make sure that we get value for the time and the money that we spend on our natural resources?
Good. All right. So let's bring the microphone over to this side. Lady behind you. And then is there anyone in the back who wants to offer a comment before we come back in front? If not, we'll come back to the front.
Good evening. Nicole Cole, and my question is directed to Mr. Ron Lucas and the goodly professor. You spoke about the money we have in a surplus and the money not being there. Really and serious, where is the money? And Professor Clive Thomas, can we retrieve that money? And
in other words, show me the money.
Yes, in real language, show us the money. And Professor Clive Thomas, is there any way that this government will be looking at gender budgeting and ensuring that women are included within that budgeting and looking at areas whereby women are at a disproportionate side in the economy, given the fact that women's on-wage work are recorded in the GDP, which is very important. And to Captain Jerry Gavaye, just recently the private sector mentioned that it had no confidence in the government. Does that status still remain? I thank you.
Okay. So we'll pass to the front, and then we'll take one final comment or question if there is any, and then we'll go final round. Wesley.
Good afternoon, folks. All the protocols observed. My name is Praxis, attorney at law, and a member of the Guyana Humanitarian Foundation. And my question is a segment of this young lady's question here. It goes to Mr. Lucas as well as the goodly professor. You did mention prior in your dialogue that there was a surplus somewhere back in 2013, then it just disappeared after that. So my question at that point is, was there any forensic studies done as to how the money disappeared, first of all, and was the surplus in any way invested in any external market instruments like, say, U.S. government bonds, or maybe treasury notes, real estate investment trusts, gold certificates, etc. And of course, past performance is not a guarantee for future forecasting success, but we can learn from that. And the other question for Professor Thomas is that going forward, does the prevailing government have a strategy in place to ensure that any surpluses we have are very well placed in market instruments, whether it's world market instruments or domestic instruments? Thank you.
Great. So we'll pass the microphone to Wesley at the back. Oh, Wesley has a mic. Wesley brought your own mic, is that?
No, I think you identified me earlier.
Okay. Very efficient, very efficient.
My comment is about the relationship between the government and the private sector. We heard tonight from both the private sector and the minister that they are both willing to consult and collaborate. But we've been hearing that for quite a while, and that is more lip service than action. Dave Martin talked about systems. And I was going to ask a question about what mechanism might be put in place to ensure ongoing collaboration, consultation, identification of priorities and so on between the government and the private sector. Jerry mentioned the competitive strategy, but he said the current government scrapped it. Eric said it's a good mechanism, but the problem is the private sector is not inclusive. I think he meant the private sector commission, or you meant the private sector, because I don't know if you're talking about the private sector. I mean, how you would say that the private sector is not inclusive? The private sector is the private sector. I would want to think you'd be saying that the private sector, the commission might not be inclusive, and I can't speak to that because I don't know that. But what I want to, the question I'd like to pose is if the competitiveness strategy is not considered the best mechanism, I'd like to hear from the panel, academics and non-academics, what might be a mechanism that would provide for honest consultation, collaboration, identification of priorities, working together, where challenges are to overcome those challenges. Because in Nicaragua, the leftist government and the private sector are getting together to fund lobbying in Washington to make sure that the Trump administration keeps DR capital. In Honduras, the government is paying 6 months' salary to certain sectors, to workers in certain private sector organizations, certain companies, to ensure that they maintain their position as the #1 t-shirt exporter to the world. In the OECS countries, just last week, the OECS countries set up a corporation to finance small and medium-sized enterprises and to guarantee loans to bigger companies, which might be granted by commercial banks. Unfortunately, in Guyana, what we have is statements between the government and the private sector back and forth in the midst of the CARICOM Heads of Government Conference. Now, I don't know whether that was deliberate or just coincidental. But I think if we're going to move forward in this country, the private sector and the government really need to get their act together jointly and start some serious collaboration, consultation and collaboration, and identify the priorities. You know, we need to have the river dredged, we need to deal with the issue of energy and move forward. Identify the priorities, agree on them and move forward.
Great, thank you.
Just a quickie. Is there any means of both sides getting together and deciding publicly to let us know on what they agree on and what they agree to disagree on? Is there not a more tremendous difficulty in this society that may be hinged on the question of public relations and the images that we as ordinary people seem to be getting, that instead of talking with the two sides each other, they seem to be talking at each other and not even talking, shouting at each other, and perhaps neither, again I use the word, neither side may perhaps be listening. Can we get past that, please?
Okay. So let's get the final comment or question there, and then we'll get the final round of responses from the panel.
Thank you. Good evening. Vice Chancellor, this question is for you first, and then I have a second question for Prof. Why are there no females on your head table? To correct that deficiency, that deficit. Let me talk in financial terms here. Prof, my question to you is, you mentioned about, looking forward and the transformative sectors that we need to pay attention to, but I also want to ask you to consider that a very important part of our green state development strategy is also the sustainable sectors as well. And I want to say that, as the Vice Chairman of the Guyana Tourism Authority, we had our tourism retreat about 3 weeks ago, and Dr. Mark Werner from the IDB came and gave a presentation to us. And he used the example of the British Virgin Islands and the importance of that tourism sector being incentivized in order to get it where it is today. So I want to say as well, I wish the Minister was still here because I would have directed this question to him as well, is that you cannot, not pay attention to the need for incentivizing the sectors, especially the sustainable sectors, such as tourism. Because while another speaker mentioned about us being natural resource based, but we only look at it in terms of an extractive context. We're not looking at it in terms of its sustainable values. So I really want to, plead that while we focus on oil and all that oil brings, good and bad, environmental worries especially, that we not look at disregarding the tourism sector, for which we've been blessed with such abundant natural resources that will outlive oil. So I just wanted to,
Great.
hear what you said there. Thank you.
Good. So we'll start with a round of responses, beginning with Professor
Starting
Thomas.
with you, start with you, the gender deficit.
I'll respond at the end. I'll respond at the end. Can we pass the mic front forward? Let's start with CY.
But let me begin by saying, I should be frank up front. I'm in no position, absolutely no position, to talk on behalf of the government. I'm advisor, and my role is strictly advisory. And the advice I give is that advice that is sought. I don't offer free advice.
And that is not being academic either.
On the question of the dialogue that many people mentioned, my mother had a saying, empty vessels make the loudest sound. So that's how I feel that debate exchange that is taking place with such loud decibels as regards the coming together of the private and public sector. I think they're just empty sounding words, and a lot of turbulence a lot of noise and very little sense. I agree entirely with you that the tourism sector is a crucial sector for Guyana. In fact, my specialist, eye doctor, I happened to discover accidentally he was born the same day and date as I did. He used to work in the Air Force One. He's a resident eye doctor. And he told me that the country, his favorite pastime is visiting countries around the world. And he felt that he came to Guyana before I did. The two most complete countries he's ever found in terms of tourist potential are Costa Rica and Guyana. You give Guyana the edge because if you stand any place in Guyana and you take a circumference of 1 square mile, 1 circular mile, you have such a variety of terrain and opportunities of variation in natural geography that you can find anywhere else. And I always remember him saying that to me, and that was about 50 years ago. So that's his world, his work. I thought the question you were going to really ask me is whether oil will undermine our progress towards a green sustainable economy. And I would have suggested to you that it need not, because the oil is being mixed with gas, and gas is still being treated as a green energy now. And I think that the emphasis on oil production should be for export, and that the hydropower that we think that we have, we should also see it integrated into the markets of Latin America. And I think this energy plan that is being prepared has taken that recommendation which I suggested on board, and so that the hydropower development in Guyana is not being proposed as just an outlet for domestic consumption, but a potential export. That in itself might rival oil. So we have to be very careful about what we talk even now, even as we are at the cusp of a transformation with oil. But I just wanted to put that as part of the dialogue that we need to, I think, come to understand at this point in time. And that is why the discussion that we're having on surpluses and all these things are important, because many people don't fail to realize it's a simple truth, that the reason why we sell our goods abroad is to get foreign exchange to buy things from abroad. We don't sell just for selling sake. We want foreign exchange not to only to keep it and put it in the bank, but to buy things from abroad that will enrich the quality of our life, that will bring new technology, that will reduce the education of people, and all that. So when we have a surplus of export foreign income over imported income, we have to be careful in what we do with that. So to my mind, it's not simply a question of, say, investing in a sovereign wealth fund to ensure there is no corruption. We have to also take into consideration, do we want to invest any surplus that we earn on our balance of payments in some other country? Because there's no point in having a sovereign wealth fund that is not composed of overseas investments. Those are very fundamental decisions that we have to take. There's nothing wrong in having a balance of payment deficit if people allow you to have it. If you sell more abroad than you buy from abroad, if you don't bring in foreign exchange, then it means you're accumulating assets overseas. And we don't want a sovereign wealth fund to end up as what we used to do under the colonial monetary system, an exchange standard that allows us to earn income through hard work of labor, utilization of resources, and banking overseas. So we have to balance all those issues. And that's the nature of the discussion, I think, that we have to shift to at this point in time. And that was why I had in fact introduced that notion toward the end of the debate, to lead it to this type of consideration. I think our friend had also made an important observation that a lot of what we spend, we need to get value for money. And this raises issues about how we spend the money, corruption, and all these other issues. I didn't want to bring, for obvious reasons, At this point in time, I didn't want to get sucked into that dialogue. And that is why I said nothing about it, but that's very important. It's the essence of public finance in Guyana now. It's at the very heart of the consideration. So we have to take that into account.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Jerry?
Sometimes it's necessary to get there. I first of all wanted to respond to Eric about the private sector must be inclusive. I'm not sure how Eric could even conceptualize that. This private sector spans from skeleton, the Central Quarantine Chamber of Commerce, the Burbage Chamber, the Linden Chamber, the Bartica Chamber, the Essequibo Chamber, the Letton Chamber, the Manufacturing Association, the Tourism and Hospitality Association, and all of the elected, democratically elected leaders from those organizations form the Private Sector Commission. And that Private Sector Commission Council elects an executive through a democratic process that runs the Private Sector Commission. The Private Sector Commission encompasses the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce president, he's here, and a whole host of Guyanese in the private sector from all walks of life, all colors and creeds, genders, and it makes us never forget the fact that we need to have a balance at our executive. And so the private sector is not a cabal. The private sector, and I think the government need to understand that. And I think many people need to understand that. People who say things like what Eric said is obviously not cognizant of the structure. And this private sector commission is not Jerry Gavaya or chairman of the private. I was the chairman 4 or 5 years ago. And we have a term limit. We can only serve for 2 terms, and after that you have to go. The Chamber of Commerce president can only serve, all of our leaders can only serve for 2 terms. This private sector don't belong to any one of us. Every one of us are elected through a democratic election, and then we have to go. I wanted to make that very clear to you. So this private sector is not a small club. It's not a closed society of any one of us. Ma'am, the private sector never said so. Let me just make it very clear to you. The private sector hosted a general meeting of businessmen from all over. They had like 100 businessmen at I think the GBTI Sports Club in Bel-Air Park. And the private sector reported what came from the floor. And the people on the floor were very concerned about the government's management of the economy. It was not that people didn't have confidence in the government. They had issues with how the economy was being managed. And that is what the private sector said. That the business people on the floor, this is what they said. Now, I have to agree with you that maybe there are different ways to say things, and maybe it could have been said differently. But having said that is to say this, that the private sector is very humble. This private sector is not walking around with arrogance. We understand who our government is, and we respect our government. And we will sit down in a respectable manner and have meaningful discussions with our government. I'm hurt that the professor that I have tremendous respect for believe that we're empty vessels. Not me, I know he said. But I think it's vitally important that both sides have that discussion, but I want to make it very clear. The private sector is not going to any negotiations or discussions with the government with egos on our shoulders and like we are somehow, no. We understand what the protocol is. We respect our government ministers, and we will always approach those discussions like that. But the private sector watching those numbers. I am in the private sector watching the statistics that the professor talked about, and the private sector is getting worried. And people on the floor said that they're getting worried and they have a confidence issue how it's being managed. The private sector could have reported that differently. I'm not going to talk about it longer. This young man somebody talked about the issue of how do we keep people accountable. And actually, 2 years into this new government, I do not understand why the Integrity Commission for 23 years was not established and functioned. And 2 years into this government, it still is not. Somebody is playing games with us as citizens. I talk here as a citizen. They're playing games. Why isn't the Integrity Commission up and running so that every one of our public officers declare their assets? Why isn't it working? What is stopping it? I have a problem with it. I have a problem with the Procurement Commission. Why isn't it functioning 100%? Why is the Ombudsman function 100%? Those three things we as citizens should demand every day to do the things you want to do. And one last thing I want to say, Professor. We talk about the green economy. You see the Rupununi? There are 3 last places on planet Earth like our Rupununi. The Galapagos, Serengeti, and our Rupununi. And we take it for granted. We believe that our Rupununi is similar to the savannas in Brazil, and it's not. We are in low wetlands. We have some of the most amazing biodiversity in our Rupununi. And if we do any development in our Rupununi that is not scientific based, we will destroy that biodiversity and destroy a treasure that is the last of the 3 places on planet Earth like it is. If we do agriculture, we do oil production, or whatever we do in that Rupununi, if it is not scientifically based. So when we talk about the green economy, you know what I say? We could walk, we could talk the talk, but we've got to walk the walk. That is really where it is. That Rupununi floods. It becomes one big lake every 5 to 10 years. We see it all the time, and we fly over and watch it. And every fertilizer and insecticide and pesticide that you do in agriculture will creep into every crevice of the Rupununi, and it will wipe out the biodiversity. And so when we talk about the green economy, we must not only talk it, we must do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DC. And you can see the passion with which my friend Jerry has responded. It's obvious that he feels very strongly about what he has observed with respect to the Guyana economy. I think he and I have had conversations in the past with respect to what are some of the things we ought to do to ensure that our economy remains on a positive road path. I know that one of the areas that he has spent some time thinking about relates to the sort of fiscal incentives, let me put it that way, that might be useful in stimulating investment in Guyana. As Citizen Lucas, I share his view. I strongly believe that economic development is driven by prudent monetary fiscal policies which are capable of ensuring that resources can be utilized as efficiently as possible. And I'm hoping that he and whoever will eventually have the conversation that needs to take place to get us to that point where we can feel satisfied with the pace of economic development in the country. Now there was a question, came from 2 sources I believe, that had to do with some of the information that I to this evening, particularly as it relates to the savings that I said we have observed with respect to the budget balances. I think one of the persons thought I had suggested that there was a surplus in 2030 and then we headed to a deficit, but it was quite the opposite. We had a deficit in 2030 and then we headed to a surplus. The question that arose, having made that observation, was what happened to the savings? And I have to be honest with you. I can't answer that question. I believe that, there's some more work that needs to be done to ensure that one has a better idea as to what might be some of the causes for the surplus not reflecting itself in the level of spending that we had grown accustomed to, and that perhaps might be part of the reason why my friend Jerry is expressing concern about the condition of the economy. Because the fundamental point that I was trying to make was that our economy depends essentially on savings. And for the type of economy that we have, the savings usually reflect themselves in the level of investment that we make and the way in which we handle our foreign sector. It is the foreign sector that seems to have declined significantly. And it's a case where we moved from a substantial deficit. This is something to keep in mind, and I think it relates to the point that Professor Thomas was making. Nothing is wrong with having a trade deficit for as long as it helps to expand the consumer choices or even the production options that we have in the country. And so our trade deficit has actually declined from somewhere around $94 billion in 2030 to about $23 or $24 billion last year. And the decline is significant. So that decline is a reflection of something. It's a reflection of something that is taking place. And given the fact that we have a surplus in our savings, but we're not spending it, then it's telling us that something is wrong. Now, maybe as I said, that the solution or the whatever the issue is with respect to the savings and spending, hopefully could come out of a dialogue between the private sector and the government. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Randy?
I'll be very brief. And to say that, Eric, I agree. I mean, we basically are on the same page where that is concerned. But I want to sound a word of GPL is a source of great worry. Whatever we do in terms of augmenting our energy resources, if we have to rely on the distribution of GPL, which after spending 40 million US, embarked on another set, is still telling us that they have 28%. Huh?
28%.
Well, it started at 32, then it came to 28, now I understand it's at 30. And it's going nowhere.
Line losses.
And line losses, well, it's both line and commercial. The truth is that I attempted to get some information, even as I said I was going to do some work on this thing. And I can't get anyone who can reliably tell me what is the mix of the technical and the commercial losses. Some people don't know half and half, but the truth is, it sounds like it's well over 20%, because the source that I finally believed in, that are actually commercial losses. And so we're not doing anything about...
Yeah, the GPL figures, I will show you documents tomorrow.
Okay.
They have to.
Yes, in fact, I called CY to
this morning.
Call the wrong time. Not to call the right time.
Anyhow, yeah, so GPL is something that we should be looking at, because regardless of what you bring the power at Sophia or wherever else, as far as the grid is concerned, if you are going to go into a sinkhole with GPL, I think we better start paying attention as a people to that means of distribution. That's all I'm going to say.
Great, thank you.
I'll make a brief statement also. This is in line in terms of the accountability. I think Jerry spoke well about it, but I'll take it from a different standpoint, an academic standpoint. In fact, in my response, I want to start with a quote from Douglas North. He argued that institution is the rule of the game, or the humanly devised construct which shapes human interaction. In essence, the fundamental point that we want to place emphasis on in terms of accountability is establishing or having strong political and economic institutions. When you hear of the statistics presented by Dr. Waldron in terms of the concentration of our minding into a few people, it suggests that there's a breakdown, or we have weak institutions. Then we need to strengthen our institutions, both political and economic. How then do we do this? Requires a comprehensive approach in which all stakeholders must be a part of such discussion. Now, it brings me to speak from a personal standpoint, that one of our fundamental challenge in terms of moving our country forward is our political divisiveness. We feel as though if we support an initiative, we're working with the opposition or we're working with the government, it's bad for our political peace. And therefore, good initiatives are oftentimes shut down. And for us to move forward, we need to be to some extent politically mature. That's my 2 cents into the discussion.
Good. Let me offer a few final thoughts before I